I always thought the people who loved you would be the ones to save you. I was wrong. The pain hit like a fist, crushing my chest from the inside. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. I reached toward my sister and whispered, "Please, call 911." She looked at me with disgust and snapped, "Stop overreacting. You're doing this for attention." Then she grabbed my phone and slammed it face down on the table. I remember the cold hardwood floor against my cheek. I remember the silence. 12 people in that room, and not a single one reached for a phone. I remember my mother's eyes, frozen, waiting for permission from my sister to help me. They all thought I was faking it. They assumed I was desperate to disrupt the will reading because I knew I'd been cut out. They had no idea what was actually in that envelope. And they had no idea that an ER doctor would soon place his hand on my sister's shoulder, look her dead in the eyes, and say 6 words that would shatter everything she believed. Have you ever been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you? My name is Nicole Barnes. I'm 36 years old, an accountant by profession, and for most of my life, I believed that if you loved people hard enough, they would eventually love you back. I was wrong about that, too. 2 weeks before the worst day of my life, I was sitting beside my father's hospital bed at home, reading him his favorite Hemingway novel while the evening light faded through the curtains. The cancer had stolen most of his voice, but his eyes were sharp, aware, taking in everything around him. I visited 3 times a week, sometimes more. I changed his sheets, I managed his medications, I took unpaid leave from work when he needed round-the-clock care. I did all of this because I loved him and because no one else would. My younger sister, Laura, visited too, of course, but her visits looked different. She came when our mother was watching, phone already in hand, ready to capture the perfect photo of herself holding Dad's hand. She stayed 20 minutes, maybe 30, then rushed off. Our mother praised her endlessly for these performances. "Laura is so devoted," she would say. "She's sacrificing so much." Meanwhile, I was invisible, the daughter who did everything and received credit for nothing. I used to wonder why our mother favored Laura so completely. Then I learned the truth. Laura was born premature and nearly died when she was just 2 days old. Our mother spent those first terrifying weeks believing she would lose her baby, and she never recovered from that fear. For the next 3 decades, she compensated by giving Laura everything: attention, money, excuses, protection from every consequence. Laura grew up believing the world owed her simply for existing, and I grew up believing I wasn't worth worrying about. But my father saw things differently. He noticed who actually showed up. He noticed who read to him for hours and who just posed for photos. One evening when we were alone, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. His voice was barely a whisper, but I heard every word clearly. "I see everything, sweetheart. Everything." I didn't understand what he meant then. I had no idea he had discovered something about Laura 6 months earlier, something that changed everything. I had no idea he had been quietly building a case ever since, preparing for a battle I didn't even know was coming. In those final weeks, Laura started acting strangely. She kept asking whether I planned to attend the will reading. "You're always so busy with work, Nick. Are you sure you can make it? No one would blame you if you couldn't." The questions felt loaded, almost hopeful, like she desperately wanted me to say no. She also started visiting our father more frequently, but only when I wasn't there, and only when our mother could witness her devotion. Meanwhile, my body was beginning to fail me. I ignored it, the way I always ignored my own needs. chest tightness that came and went, shortness of breath climbing stairs, cold sweats that woke me at 3 in the morning. I mentioned it to my mother once. She barely looked up from her phone. "You're just stressed, honey. You always overthink things." So I stopped mentioning it. I pushed through the pain and kept showing up for everyone else, never realizing that my heart was sending me warnings I couldn't afford to ignore. And then, on the morning of the will reading, I woke with a weight on my chest that wouldn't lift. My hands were trembling before I even got out of bed. Something felt wrong, deeply, terribly wrong. I couldn't explain it, couldn't name it, but the feeling followed me as I got dressed, as I drove to my parents' house, as I walked through the front door into a room full of relatives who barely acknowledged my presence. I had no idea that in less than an hour, I would be lying on the floor, dying, while my family watched and did nothing. The living room was already full when I arrived. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, all gathered in chairs arranged in neat rows like a funeral service. And there was Laura, standing at the front of the room beside the lawyer's empty chair, greeting people as though she owned the place. She had arrived early to position herself as the host. She directed people to their seats. She accepted condolences with practiced grace. She was performing, and everyone was buying it. I found a chair in the corner away from the center, and no one seemed to notice or care. My mother was across the room, surrounded by relatives who patted her hand and told her how lucky she was to have such a devoted daughter in Laura. I watched her nod and smile, accepting praise for a sacrifice that never happened. The lie was so complete, so effortless, that I wondered if she had started believing it herself. Throughout the morning, I heard the whispers. They weren't even trying to be quiet. Aunt Patricia leaned toward her daughter and murmured, "Nicole was never really close to Thomas. She barely visited at the end." My cousin Mark shook his head and said, "It's sad, really. Laura was the one who stepped up when it mattered." I sat there gripping the armrest of my chair, feeling each word like a knife sliding between my ribs. I had taken unpaid leave to care for my father. I had held his hand through the worst nights. I had read to him until my voice gave out. But to this room full of people, I was the absent daughter, the one who didn't care enough. When my mother stood up and announced to everyone that Laura had sacrificed so much to care for my father in his final months, something inside me cracked. I wanted to stand up and scream the truth, but I didn't. I stayed silent, the way I always did. I swallowed my pain to keep the peace, because that was what I had been trained to do since childhood. The lawyer finally arrived and took his seat at the front of the room. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents. The room fell quiet. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Laura stood beside him like a queen awaiting her coronation, her chin lifted, her eyes bright with anticipation. She had no doubt about what was coming, none at all. And that was when the pain hit. It started as pressure, like someone had placed a heavy stone on my chest. Then it tightened, squeezed, became a fist closing around my heart from the inside. I gasped and gripped the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead, soaking through my blouse. My vision blurred at the edges, the room tilting and swimming. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt like they belonged to someone else. I reached toward my mother, my hand trembling in the air. My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Something's wrong. Please, I need help. Call 911. Every person in that room saw me. Every person heard my desperate plea. My mother's eyes met mine. And for one moment, I thought she would come to me. I thought the woman who gave birth to me would push past everyone and take my hand and call for help. But then Laura's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Oh, stop it, Nicole. Stop overreacting." Her face twisted with contempt as she marched toward me. "You're doing this for attention because you know Dad left everything to me. You can't stand that he finally saw through you." I tried to reach for my phone on the side table, but Laura was faster. She grabbed it before I could, silenced it with a single swipe, and slammed it face down on the coffee table, pushing it out of my reach. Then she turned to our mother, her voice firm and commanding. "Don't call anyone, Mom. She's faking it. If she makes a scene, we'll have to delay this whole thing. Just ignore her." My mother looked at me, then at Laura, then back at me. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the decades of deference to her younger daughter fighting against some buried maternal instinct. But Laura's gaze was steady and certain, and my mother's was not. She didn't move. She didn't reach for her phone. She just stood there, frozen, waiting for permission that Laura would never give. The relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Uncle Robert cleared his throat, and Aunt Patricia looked at the floor. No one moved. No one spoke. No one helped. They were all witnesses to my suffering, and not a single one of them lifted a finger. The pain intensified, becoming something I cannot describe with words. My heart was failing. I could feel it stuttering, struggling, losing the rhythm that had kept me alive for 36 years. My legs buckled completely, and I crumpled to the hardwood floor, my cheek hitting the cold wood, my body folding in on itself. My breathing became shallow, ragged, desperate. I could feel my lips tingling, going numb. What none of them knew was that someone else had been watching. Eleanor, my father's neighbor and closest friend, had heard the shouting from her house next door. She had walked across the yard to see what was happening. She had been standing in the open doorway for several minutes, witnessing everything. She saw Laura grab my phone. She heard Laura tell our mother not to call for help. She watched my body hit the floor while a room full of relatives did nothing. And while my family stood paralyzed by their own cruelty and cowardice, Mrs. Eleanor had pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the distant sound of sirens, growing louder, coming closer. The sirens were the last thing I heard before everything went black. Then there was nothing but darkness, a void where time didn't exist. When I started coming back, it was in fragments, voices first, urgent, professional voices, calling out numbers and medical terms I couldn't understand. The sensation of movement, of being lifted, of something pressing against my face, helping me breathe. I learned later what happened in those critical minutes after I collapsed. Mrs. Eleanor told me everything when I was strong enough to hear it. She had guided the paramedics straight into my parents' living room, past the stunned relatives who were still standing exactly where they had been, frozen in their own cowardice. The EMTs rushed to my side and began checking my vitals. Their faces turned grave almost immediately. One of them looked up at the room full of people and asked the question that would haunt my family for years to come. "She's in cardiac distress. How long has she been down? Why wasn't 911 called immediately?" Laura stepped forward with that practiced expression of concern she had perfected over a lifetime. She was already composing her excuse, already spinning the story. I was just about to call when... But Mrs. Eleanor cut her off before she could finish. Her voice was steady and cold, carrying the authority of a woman who had seen enough lies to last a lifetime. "That's not true. I was standing right there in the doorway. I saw you take her phone out of her hand. I heard you tell your mother not to call for help. I heard every single word you said." The paramedics exchanged glances. According to Mrs. Eleanor, Laura's face drained of all color in that moment. For the first time in her life, she had been caught in a lie she couldn't charm her way out of. My next clear memory is waking up in a hospital bed with tubes in my arm and a steady beeping sound marking each beat of my heart. Sitting beside my bed was a doctor in blue scrubs, Dr. Reeves. He explained my condition. My heart had been under stress for months, and the episode at my parents' house had pushed it to the breaking point. If the paramedics had arrived even a few minutes later, I might not have survived. Then his expression changed. He leaned forward slightly and spoke to me in a voice meant only for my ears. "I've documented everything about today, Miss Barnes. The circumstances of your arrival, the delay in calling for help, the witness account from the woman who called 911. What happened to you today, the way your family responded, it's all in your medical file now. If you ever need evidence for any reason, legal or otherwise, it exists. I want you to know that." What I didn't witness, but learned about later, was what happened in the waiting room. Dr. Reeves found Laura and asked her to step into the hallway. In that hallway, away from our mother and relatives, Dr. Reeves looked Laura directly in the eyes. His voice was quiet and professional, but it carried weight. He said 6 words that would shatter everything Laura believed about herself. "She nearly died because of you." Later that evening, Mrs. Eleanor came to sit beside my bed. She took my hand. "Your father asked me to watch over you," she said softly. "He knew this family, Nicole. He saw how they treated you. His exact words to me were, 'Nicole is the only one who truly loved me. When I'm gone, don't let them break her.' But there's something else. He told me that when the will was read, you might be surprised. He said he had been watching and waiting for months, gathering evidence, making sure his final wishes couldn't be challenged." The next morning, I woke to find the family lawyer standing at the foot of my bed. He was carrying a sealed envelope and a thick folder pressed against his chest. He looked at me and said quietly, "Your father anticipated this day might come. He left very specific instructions and evidence. He wanted only you to see." The lawyer opened the sealed envelope right there in my hospital room and handed me the contents. It was a handwritten letter from my father, and it said, "Don't let them break your heart again, sweetheart. You were the daughter I was proud of. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now." I pressed that letter to my chest and sobbed. Several days later, the formal will reading took place at the lawyer's office downtown. Laura sat across from me, her posture confident, her eyes expectant. She still believed the will would favor her. The lawyer cleared his throat and announced that my father had rewritten his will 1 month before his death. Then he read the terms. The majority of my father's estate, the house, the investments, the savings, everything of significant value went to me. Laura and my mother would receive only the legally required minimum. Laura leaped to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "This is insane! He wasn't in his right mind. He had dementia." The lawyer remained calm. "Actually, Miss Barnes, your father anticipated you might make that claim. That's why there's more." He opened the thick folder. 6 months before his death, my father received a call from his bank. Someone had attempted to withdraw $30,000 using a forged signature. The bank provided my father with full documentation, including a professional handwriting analysis. The lawyer paused and looked directly at Laura. The analysis identified you as the forger, Miss Barnes. The room went completely silent. Laura's confident expression crumbled like a mask falling away. My father hadn't confronted her. He had spent 5 months quietly watching her, consulting with 2 independent physicians who certified his mental faculties were completely intact, and securing 3 witnesses when he signed the new will. He had told the lawyer, "I want to make sure Laura can never claim I didn't know what I was doing." The lawyer then presented Mrs. Eleanor's formal written statement, a detailed eyewitness account of what happened the day I collapsed. Every word Laura had said was documented. "Don't call anyone, she's faking it." My father had asked Mrs. Eleanor to be vigilant after he discovered the forgery. He never imagined she would go as far as she did. My father, weak and dying, had spent his final months preparing for this battle. He had known what Laura was. He had known what my mother would allow. And he had never stopped fighting for me. I moved to a small cottage 3 streets away from Mrs. Eleanor, the woman who saved my life. Using my inheritance, I established a scholarship fund in my father's name through the American Heart Association to help patients who might otherwise be ignored. I finally stopped giving my heart to people who treated it carelessly. I learned that setting boundaries is not cruelty, but wisdom. What I needed, what I had spent 36 years searching for, I had finally found. A life where I wasn't invisible, a family that chose me, and the unshakable knowledge that my father, in the end, had seen me, truly seen me, and loved me exactly as I was. That was enough. That was everything. If Nicole's story touched something deep in your heart today, I want you to know that you are not alone. So many of us have been the invisible ones in our own families. But here is what Nicole's journey teaches us. Your worth is not determined by the people who fail to recognize it. The family that overlooks you, the siblings who compete with you, their blindness does not diminish your value. It reveals their limitations, not yours. You are not invisible. You have simply been surrounded by people who refuse to open their eyes. Nicole won because she finally stopped accepting less than she deserved. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to protect your peace. That is not selfishness. That is self-respect, and it is never too late to claim it.